Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Seattle University's first ever Racial Equity Summit. My name is Reverend Victoria Carr-Ware, and I'm so glad to welcome you here to this awesome and historic occasion. I am your Master of Ceremony, and Natasha Martin will be with us soon, who is co-hosting with me. She is the Vice President of Equity and Inclusion here at Seattle University. Thank you once again for joining with us. Well, I'm just really grateful to be participating in this awesome summit experience. And I wanted to share that it has been our tradition at Seattle U to open institutional events, programs, and other gatherings with an Indigenous land recognition and acknowledgement. For this Racial Equity Summit, we are expanding this acknowledgement to consider the enduring impact of white power and white privilege, this country's racist history and its continuing legacy of disenfranchisement, domestic terror, and denial. Our land, labor, and takings acknowledgement includes a land acknowledgement of the Indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, an acknowledgement of African slave labor, an acknowledgement of the Japanese internment, an acknowledgement of anti-immigration sentiment, especially against our Latinx community, an acknowledgement of our relationship with the central and international districts, the ways we benefit from gentrification and exclusion, and an acknowledgement of the historical impact of white supremacy. We invite you to listen deeply to our land, labor, and takings acknowledgement as we hear from our Seattle University colleagues and students. This will be followed by an invocation from the Right Reverend Edward Donaldson III.
Huyats, Gualapu Ishid, Gualapu Ishid, Inach Kanicha Titsta, Stokwabi Huchad. That was my formal introduction in Tulshutsi, the native language of the Puget Sound region Coast Salish tribes. I'm here to start this meeting off right and read off the land acknowledgement created by Seattle University. The following statement is offered as a first step for our community. It serves as an opportunity to collectively recognize these lands wherever we may find ourselves today, to honor the Indigenous people past and present who belong to these places, to have a common and consistent language for Seattle University's events and ceremonies that is crafted with care and wisdom. As we begin our gathering, I invite us all to respectfully acknowledge that our campus is on occupied Coast Salish land, specifically the homelands of the Duwamish. To acknowledge this land is to recognize the history and legacy of settler colonialism. It is to recognize these lands, waters, and their significance for the peoples who have thrived in this region despite the consequences of displacement and broken treaties. Let us take a moment to pause and pay our respects to the Coast Salish elders, past and present, and extend that respect to their descendants and to all Indigenous people. I am honored to open this Racial Equity Summit with a land acknowledgement, but I hope you all take a moment to think about what's next in our fight against injustice. Recognizing the racial and cultural inequities in our society was the first step, but the time for real systematic change is upon us. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
We're going through the enslaved labor acknowledgement at this meeting. Today, we are cognizant that we cannot separate the history of Seattle University or our community from the history of colonialism and slavery in the United States. We acknowledge that African slavery came to the Pacific Northwest in its earliest stages and contributed to our political and cultural landscape. Slavery is part of our origin story, and we must reckon with this truth by first admitting to this reality. We recognize the grave harm that colonialism brought to these lands, the erasure of African identities, not only under slavery, but also via racist laws during the Jim Crow era, and the segregation of people in our community. We acknowledge this nation was built and prospered through a brutal system of owning other human beings as property and exploiting their labor. We confess that the remnants of colonialism and Blackness exist to this day, that institutional racism is real, and that we have reaped the benefits of the legacy of nearly 250 years of enslavement of free Black people, followed by over 2 centuries more of racial terror through lynching, legalized racial segregation, and racist laws, policies, and practices. Let us work against racial injustice by looking inside our own hearts and considering our own actions. We must not only remember those who have faced violence and exclusion in our community, but we must also stand in solidarity with those who continue to battle hatred and racism today. We profess that Black lives matter, and we commit to the unwinding the many harms, both personal and structural, caused by white supremacy. May we at Seattle University strive to foster a more equitable and inclusive environment for all people. Thank you.
Good morning, Seattle University community. My name is Dale Watanabe, and I serve as a director of the International Student Center. I acknowledge and recognize the painful history of the land that our campus occupies. I am a descendant of a family that once lived at the south end of campus in what was once known as Nihon Machi, or Japantown. By a presidential executive order just 79 years ago in 1942, every man, woman, and child of the Japanese American community was rounded up and forced to live behind barbed wire in an American concentration camp. Most from this community spent 3 years in the desert of Southeast Idaho. Today, we recognize this wrongful act against an entire community, simply guilty because of their race, and we honor the space that once was home to a vibrant neighborhood. Our beautiful campus includes several gardens designed by Fujitaro Kubota, who himself was imprisoned in the camp in Idaho, and our Japanese American Remembrance Garden, designed by his grandson, is a reminder and tribute to the immigrant community that once was a part of our campus that never returned.
As we gather today, we lift up the stories of our siblings who face anti-immigrant sentiment and hostility from members of our own community and beyond. We pause with hearts open in prayer. For the desperate and courageous brown and Black children and families who cross the border looking for a better future. The victims of human trafficking coerced into slave labor and prostitution while pursuing the American dream. The families separated by immigration policies and the children thrown in cages. The asylum seekers detained in our prisons without cause. The multitude of refugees forced from their homes to strange places through war or the destruction of their environment. The migrant workers in our own Washington state and beyond who must travel in search of work. Those who are not paid a livable wage, but whose work brings the fruits of the field and the vine to our tables. Those who labor at the margins of our communities, invisible and all too often exploited. And the immigrants and the undocumented whose gifts enrich our land and our lives, but who are told through prejudice, pronouncements, and policies that their lives do not matter. We confess today the ways in which we as a university may choose profit and power over the dignity and worth of each person. May we instead see the divine likeness in all of creation and strive to promote and enact immigration laws and policies that uphold the rights and dignity of every person, especially the most vulnerable among us.
Today, we also acknowledge the reality of gentrification and structural racism in our community and the ways that Seattle University has benefited from these systems. Decades of segregation, redlining, and urban renewal policies have oppressed and exploited people of color and displaced low-income residents in the neighborhoods adjacent to our campus. These policies have especially impacted historically Black communities that have called the Central District home for generations, and historically Asian American communities that have called the Chinatown International District home since the late 1800s. As we actively work against racial and economic injustice and against the continuing legacy of gentrification, Seattle University strives to connect our faculty, staff, and students to the local community through the Center for Community Engagement, the Seattle University Youth Initiative, the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and multiple other campus initiatives. Let us pause to acknowledge and confess that the only way to fulfill Seattle University's mission of pursuing a just and humane world is through community relationship building and long-term individual, organizational, and system-wide focuses on understanding and undoing white supremacy.
We were born into the system of white supremacy. We did not choose it, but we are saddled with it. It was invented hundreds of years ago, but is still pervasive because we are continually socialized into its culture. White supremacy centers on the lie of white racial superiority. It manifests in a myriad of insidious ways, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, a few of which were just mentioned. Every one of us is impacted by this self-sustaining system. It is all-encompassing. If we do nothing, it will continue to harm us and future generations. If we answer the call, we can interrupt and dismantle it.
Good morning, beloved. I would like to take this moment to invite you into the experience of the day. Prepare to bring forward your open hearts and open minds to this collective experience. We look forward to the process of being together and becoming better. Toward that end, let us pray. Our divine guide, who is known by many names, we give reverence to you. Thy kingdom come without empire. Provide daily bread because everyone seeks to flourish. Lead us not into the temptation of cultural appropriation, tokenizing hiring practices, unjust and unexamined scholarship practices, or general intolerance. Deliver us from predatory lending and redlining and the sins of unrestricted greed manifested in materialism, racism, militarism, and the prison industrial complex. Make us mindful of the ways we participate in an unjust system of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, cis heteropatriarchy as we move toward a more inclusively just and humane world. Deliver us from the effects of all oppression because we move toward an anti-racist global community. The kingdom is one, the power is universal, the glory is divine. Amen. We're looking forward to hearing from Janae Conley Perez. She's the director of the Young Adult Ensemble and the Youth Choir at New Beginnings Christian Fellowship, one of the fastest growing Black congregations in the Pacific Northwest. Let us enjoy Janae.
the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening ground, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with the steady beat and not unweary feet, come to the place for which our fathers died. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy place, till now we stand where the white gleam of a bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Oh, lest our feet stray from the places of God where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Out from the gloomy past, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our name. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to Seattle University's first Racial Equity Summit. Thank you for being here this morning, bringing your head, heart, and habits, bringing your eyes, your ears, your hearts. You have already been filled with the gift of music. We will be filled with the gift of art and the gift of symbols, the gift of narratives, which you've already begun to hear through the power of place. And we will be gifted with stories today. So today will be filled with the spirit of our Jesuit values. I want to say that I hope you're ready to reflect today, as we do at a Jesuit university. There will be many opportunities to reflect today, so I want you to grab a journal. I want you to get comfortable so that you can be comfortable today, being uncomfortable. What an opportunity we have today to be together, to learn and to grow, to celebrate, as well as to lament. You've already heard from Victoria Carr-Ware, who is our ecumenical and multi-faith campus minister at Seattle University, and she is our master of ceremony for today. So let me give you a bit of a roadmap of how we'll spend our time today. The program is divided into 3 segments. We are enjoying affirmation and allyship, where we will also learn a little bit more about our Seattle University context, and we will also hear from colleagues who will talk about what it means to be an ally for solidarity. Then we will have a wonderful collective learning and engagement opportunity with civil rights scholar and civil rights activist, Michelle Alexander, the author of the acclaimed The New Jim Crow. And in the afternoon segment, we will be thinking about visioning together, taking action for a better Seattle University that is inclusively excellent for all. And the afternoon will be a treat as well, because we will hear from university leadership. We will have an opportunity to see and experience what it can mean to actually integrate anti-racist education into Seattle University. We will be able to enjoy some of our student works and have some special recognitions. So today is really about 3 things. The summit goals are: we are here to affirm one another, and to affirm the many voices and experiences that are part of our community. We are here to learn more about what it means to be an ally for solidarity. And finally, we're here to activate for change. So I would ask that you bring 3 things in addition to your journals: your heads, your hearts, and be open for new habits of engagement. Our Jesuit values will be on full display today. Our values of care, academic excellence, diversity, faith, justice, and leadership. And so now I would like to introduce you to our resident artist for today. Our resident artist for today is Ruth Zacharias, and she is a student at Seattle University, as well as a Sullivan Leadership Scholar. And Ruth has agreed to be our resident artist for today. She will memorialize this day for us. And we're calling this segment Art in Action. And so Ruth will listen, take in what she sees, hears, feels from our time together today. And she will create a work of art. We will check in with Ruth at various times throughout today, and we'll have a reveal at the end of the day. So Ruth's creation is really connected to one of the pillars of Lift SU, narratives through art and symbols. And so I'm really grateful that Ruth has agreed to be with us today and offer this really, really special edition. So Ruth, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, everyone. I am so excited to be here with everyone. This is also a first time for me, as this summit is a first time for everyone. I'm really excited to be here and using my skills to embody all of the beautiful work that Dr. Natasha Martin, Victoria Carware, and everyone else that has made this program possible. And so I just hope that my piece can reflect just a piece of all of the beautiful things that are going to be happening today. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ruth. We're very excited that you will be our resident artist for today. Thank you. So now, colleagues, I want to talk a little bit about why today is important. Offer a little bit of context for Seattle University, and think about why today is important. So today is important, first of all, because of who we are. as a Jesuit Catholic university with this mission. Seattle University is dedicated to educating the whole person, to professional formation, and to empowering leaders for a just and humane world. So as a Jesuit Catholic university, we have the responsibility to educate students who understand the context of the world around them, to understand the world as it is, in order to create one that is more loving, more equitable, more just, and more humane. So the second reason why today is important is because of what we have all experienced together. 2020 came and brought with it a constellation of circumstances that we all had to deal with. And so it is important that we reflect on the issue of systemic racism, given the consequential year and what feels like a racial revolution. But we started this year with a global pandemic that claimed over 575,000 souls. And its resurgence. We have experienced a disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color, a contentious election season, a deadly insurrection, escalation of anti-Asian xenophobia and racism, ongoing deadly violence, anti-immigrant sentiment, impacting our Latinx communities with a particular vengeance against those crossing our southern border to seek refuge, and the continuing invisibility of our indigenous communities. And we experienced the largest social movement in history for Black lives. So we tried to reconcile the death of George Floyd and the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and countless others at the hands of the police. So today is about truth. It is about truth telling. It is about truth seeking. It is about learning about the truth of who we are. And as James Baldwin famously wrote in a New York Times essay in the early 1960s, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. We are living history, and we must decide as a university and as individual citizens, who do we want to be? Almost a year ago, we gathered, we lamented, we mourned, we were stricken by grief, paralyzed in disbelief and fear. And we've had those feelings yet again and again and again. So those are two of the reasons why today is important. A third reason why today is important is because of our Seattle University context. And let me say that part of what we've been experiencing over the last 1+ year right now is not new. And in fact, there is a long arc of history that we have to take stock of, right? Because the incidents that happened last spring, they are not new. And we understand that. But they go back centuries. And so here you have a representation of more than 400 years of an arc of racial oppression of African descendant people in the United States. And it takes us from 1619 up until the 2000s, where we are now. And you will see represented there the new Jim Crow. So we're going to have an opportunity today with our keynote conversation with Michelle Alexander to learn more about the essence of this arc. So today we are charting the way forward. And the way forward is through affirmation, allyship, and action. So in the fall of 2020, I announced LIFT-SU, the Inclusive Excellence Action Plan for Racial Equity and Anti-Racism. And many of you know that there are some operating principles that inform LIFT-SU and our work together. And those include that we will listen and learn from one another. We will impact our university through intentional action. We will fail forward, right? We are imperfect. That is, in fact, the way we were made. But we will learn from our mistakes. We will forgive ourselves and one another. And then we will continue to move. And then finally, we will transform together. So LIFT-SU has 5 priority initiatives. And those priority initiatives include being more attentive to what our community looks like. So focusing on the recruitment and retention of more students of color, making sure that our ecosystem that is our university is healthy, through making sure that we have mechanisms in place that make it possible for us to understand what's happening in our campus climate. And then also thinking about the recruitment and retention of diverse faculty and staff. And as you've already been introduced to our student Ruth, narratives through arts and symbols, really making sure that our university represents all of the intersectional identities that are a part of our community. And then we want to make sure that we can build capacity, to do this work well and to do it in a sustainable fashion. And so you may be thinking about the term BIPOC and wondering, where does that come from, right? And why are we using that term? Language is contested, and we want to make sure that we are honoring the voices and the experiences within our campus community. This term is associated with the current social movement, and it represents Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It has a real historical significance, honoring the connection, the relationship between Black, Indigenous, and people of color to systems of oppression through slavery, the genocide of Indigenous peoples. So there is a historical connection with this term. And I think it's really important to remember that LIFT-SU promotes an inclusive lens with a concern for all historically and underrepresented and marginalized people within our community. So we are concerned about our entire community. And this particular term situates us within the context of this current social movement. I will share that it is not a perfect term. And in fact, it is a contested term. And we will have more discussions about this term. But that is the term that is associated with this tremendous social movement that we are all a part of. So I want to talk a little bit about how we got here. Seattle University's pursuit of inclusive excellence, did not start today. In fact, you're seeing a timeline here, and I won't rehearse the entire timeline. But what is relevant here is that we began the inclusive excellence journey in 2013. And we had a task force that was commissioned by President Stephen Sundborg. We had the first ever campus-wide climate assessment. Our Board of Trustees adopted the strategic plan and directions in January of 2020 after an extended engagement with our entire campus to chart the future of what we wanted Seattle University to be. And the position that I currently hold with honor as the inaugural Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion at Seattle University, was established in September of 2017. So in the arc of doing this work, we are in the early stages of it in many ways. The life cycle of change, particularly when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, is 7 to 10 years, right? So we are in the thick of it, but we have made gains, and there are tremendous miles to go. So with our strategic directions that were adopted by the Board of Trustees in January of 2020, inclusive excellence is now enshrined into those strategic directions. And in fact, you will see listed there as one of the core elements that inclusive excellence across all operations and programs is really what this work is all about. So it's enshrined into our strategic directions. But we have to remember, how do we get there? So if that is the strategic direction that we have claimed for ourselves, how do we get there? And so it means that we have to mitigate our own biases and change structures. Both of those things have to happen in tandem, really, or together, simultaneously, actually. So making progress on equity will require us to both mitigate our own biases and change structures. So this is about transformation. And in order to transform our university in this way, it's going to take each of us engaging in our own exploration and growth. So it's about ourselves, ourself, and it's about our systems. So it's about both of those things. And there's a reciprocal relationship between the two. And in order to transform our university, we have to understand our context. We can't change that which we don't know, or which we don't understand, or which we have no curiosity about. And so I think it's important for us, if we're thinking about the pillars of Lift SU around increasing and retaining a diverse student body, diversity in our faculty and staff, creating the kind of inclusive environment where everyone can thrive, we have to understand what it is, who we are today and what does our environment look like. So I'm happy that Irina Voloshin has agreed to join us today to give us a little bit of that context. Irina?
Thank you, Natasha. Good morning, everyone. I'm Irina Voloshin. I'm the Director of Institutional Research, and I want to thank you all for being here today. And I will also want to say how honored I am to be included in this vitally important university conversation. So let's jump to the presentation plan slide now. So the first question that you see is, who are we? And that is a large question in the context of racial equity. So this is a question that can be answered in many ways, and none of those lie in data alone. Rather, the process of discernment or understanding of our Seattle University community can be data informed, but never not data driven. I'm here to provide some of the database context describing the recent history of racial and ethnic representation for Seattle University. In order to fully imagine and plan for the work that will follow this important moment in the university's history, this context plays an important role. So now I'll actually talk about what I'll be presenting. I'll begin by reviewing the 5-year history of race and ethnic representation among students. And in order to talk about representation, I'll touch on the definition of the groups I'll be talking about, which are traditionally underrepresented students and BIPOC students, as well as staff and faculty. I'll unpack the trends in underrepresented student representation and BIPOC representation for all students. Excuse me, and I'll follow that by showing you how that representation differs by student groups. Natasha just touched on some of those definitions, and I'll kind of add to that a little bit. Our community is centered around students, but faculty and staff are important members whose representation patterns we should also examine. So like for students, I'll present a 5-year history of representation for all faculty, then I'll also for tenure track faculty, and then also for all staff. Then in discussing the data-informed methods of arriving at a conception of who are we, I'll talk about the most comprehensive survey tool or survey instrument that we have had to observe the state of the campus climate, which was a survey that was actually deployed over 5 years ago. And although 5 years may seem like an eternity, I will briefly talk about why it's still highly relevant. Next, I'll discuss student achievement outcomes, which are at the heart of our mission and values at the university. We will examine the intersection of student identities and representation in the context of a landmark student achievement outcome, which is 6-year graduation rates for freshmen entering students. Finally, I will revisit one of the themes discussed at the outset of this talk, which is what student subpopulations really drive increased representation and diversity. And as we will see, new undergraduates are at the forefront of increased representation of traditionally underrepresented and BIPOC students at the university. I'll provide a glimpse of new freshmen and transfer students set to arrive in the university in the fall of 2021. Understanding incoming student pipelines provides another important context for understanding not only who we are, but who we will be, and planning the ongoing important work we need to do as a campus to not just offer, but guarantee equitable access, opportunities, and advancement for students. So let's jump to the student composition slide. Before I go into the representation of patterns for students, staff, and faculty, I need to touch on the 2 different terms I will be using: traditionally underrepresented students and BIPOC students. While you may be familiar with both of these terms, and again, Natasha just touched on one of them, BIPOC students and faculty and staff, it's important to establish where they are the same and where they are different. These terms help us represent and interpret racial and ethnic inequity patterns endemic to higher education. That is not to say that the circumstances and structural factors underlying inequities for underrepresented groups are the same. In fact, the truth cannot be farther from that statement. When looking at the pattern of representation and outcomes, it's important to keep peeling the layers of compositional complexity down. This is a brief presentation, so I cannot go very far down these layers of complexity, but I still hope to show you that even at this kind of shallower layer, there are important truths to glean about representation. Underrepresented students in higher education are those who have been historically had structural impediments to equitable representation in higher ed. And those students include Black or African American students, Hispanic or Latinx students, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander students, and American Indian or other Alaska Native students, as well as students of multiple origins with any one or more of those identities. BIPOC students, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, include all students of color, so Black or African American students, all Asian student groups, Hispanic, Latinx students, Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders, and American Indian and Alaska Native students. I'll be reviewing a representation of both underrepresented students, traditionally underrepresented in higher ed, and BIPOC students, as well as BIPOC faculty and staff. In the next slides, I'll be presenting graphs of histories of underrepresented students and BIPOC student representation for all students. And then I'll kind of take it one level down, looking at different representations by different student groups. So for graduate law students, then undergraduates, and then finally, I will show new undergraduate students and how they drive some of the biggest increases in representation for BIPOC students. So let's go to the total student slide. First, let's go to the blue bars. Thank you. First, we see that these blue bars represent the total student enrollment in SU for the last 5 years. So these are all students, graduate, law, undergraduates. And you see that the enrollment is stable, but there's been a dip in the last few years, which is really heavily related to COVID. Next to data series, please. While the dip is happening, representation of both traditionally underrepresented students and BIPOC students, which is the next series, has been increasing. As I said at the outset, there are many layers to even seemingly simple questions of quantifying representation. When looking more closely at student composition, we begin to see representation pattern differences between different student groups. So let's go to the graduate student slide next. First, the blue bars again, we see the opposite pattern in terms of enrollment numbers that we have just seen, which is that pandemic year has resulted in an increase in law and grad enrollment. Excuse me, next series, please. In this case, we can see the proportion of traditionally underrepresented students among grad and law students is slightly lower than the overall student body. Next series, please. However, there's still steady increases in representation. When we go to the next slide, you will see a group of students who have closer or slightly higher than average representation for BIPOC students, and that's the undergraduate student body. Here we see a more pronounced dip in enrollment in the last year. So again, you can see kind of who's driving the dips and the increases for total student enrollment. So, so we see COVID has had an impact on enrollment. We're also seeing higher figures of representation than the previous slide. So if you can go to the next trend, please. Undergraduates are a larger body of students, thus they have a larger impact on averages across all students. But undergraduates are also driving the averages not only because of their large overall numbers, but because of higher representation rates, especially for BIPOC students. So the next trend, please. So you see for this current academic year, 2021, we have 47% BIPOC students versus 43% like we saw in the first slide for overall student population. Finally, we're going to take the intersection of student statuses down one more level of nuance to the new versus continuing students amongst undergraduates. So let's go to the new undergraduate slide. Here we see an even greater impact of COVID, first of all, as far as student enrollment numbers go. However, like with every other student population, we see an increase in representation. So if you go to the next data trend, and even greater than overall representation increases in BIPOC student representation, with an over 10% increase in BIPOC representation just in the last 2 years alone. That is not to say that it's all linear or positive in terms of trends. We have lost ground during some years, but we have also regained it. Now let's go to the faculty representation slide. Like with student representation, there's an overall trend, and it's very incremental, but it's headed up. Like with students, there are a number of salient dimensions of faculty and staff groups. In this presentation, I'm focusing on 2 faculty groups, all faculty, that's the yellow line that you see here, and those with tenure and tenure track, the blue line that you see. And then I'm also presenting staff patterns, which are the green line. And like with students, it isn't fully unidirectional. There are steps back that would take some years, as this year with tenure and tenure track faculty representation. Nonetheless, there is evidence for slow progress in representation of BIPOC faculty, although student representation far outpaces staff and faculty. Now we will jump to a brief consideration of other sources of data on equity outcomes and the factors underlying equity challenges in access and advancement. And we're going to be looking at the campus climate study. So the campus climate assessment happened some time ago and was fielded in 1415, and apologies about the error on the slide, it says 1516, but the results were delivered in the fall of 2015. And there was continued work by the task force, as well as collaboration between Natasha Martin, Institutional Research, and the deans of every school and college for many years thereafter, to do work on campus climate. Although I do not have adequate time here to present the findings, the study did show significant differences in terms of the experience of marginalized groups. And they continue to experience a very different campus climate than non-marginalized groups in many different dimensions. The climate study was based on a comprehensive, in-depth, and nuanced instrument. And the analysis of the survey was undertaken in phases, and the results of these analyses informed many vitally important campus conversations. However, while it behooves a university to keep survey metrics up to date, long-term work to address structural and institutional factors resulting in opportunity and advancement in equity still remain. Thus, it's unlikely that any update of the survey will demonstrate results drastically different and improved from the original survey. There's also evidence from the State of the Undergraduate Survey, the SUS, that undergraduate students continue to report hostile and exclusionary experience at similar rates than they did at 1450. And this is from the 1920 survey. So where most of the undergraduates who were sampled in 1415 have departed campus. So my next slide can easily be a presentation in itself, or multiple, in fact. However, it's important still to represent outcome equity or lack thereof for different student identity groups. So let's go to the 6-year graduation slide in the first set of bars. Thank you. Graduating in 6 or fewer years is one of the most benchmarked outcomes in higher education. It's the ultimate measure of efforts of any higher education institution, one that confers bachelor degrees at serving their students. And a quick note about years, you'll see on the x-axis years that are quite a bit back. So these are years that are cohort or entry years of students. So students entering in 1415 would have graduated in 1920. So we will soon know graduation rates for those who entered in 15, 16, but we don't quite know the final ones yet. There are 4 groups represented on this slide, and each of them has 5 years worth of graduation history. I know it's a lot of data, but it's important to juxtapose this hallmark outcome across multiple groups to understand the pattern for these outcomes and to direct resources where they're needed. So you see the blue lines represent all freshmen entering students. And we see that there's been a slight dip in overall graduation rates for all freshmen entering students over the last 5 years. Next, let's look at the graduation rates for traditionally underrepresented students, the orange bars. Here you see a U-shaped pattern where there's a dip in the middle of the 5-year history where the disparities are larger between all FDIC or first time in college entering undergraduates and traditionally underrepresented first time in college entering undergraduates. This is followed by a narrowing of the gap in the recent years, although graduation rates are not back quite fully to the rates we saw 5 years ago. The next bar is for graduation rates of BIPOC students. So that's a gray bar where you see both parity and disparity in certain years. In some years, like for the 14-15 cohort, the most recent graduates, the graduation rates actually exceed the overall rates. The final bar is for BIPOC students who are first generation in college, who are the first generation in their family to go and complete college, and that's the yellow bar. This is yet another demonstration of the impact of identities at the intersection of group membership. Graduation rates of first generation BIPOC students have fluctuated the most out of all the groups depicted here. Partly this is because the total size of this group, first generation BIPOC students, is smaller. So smaller numeric changes result in larger percentage changes, but it's also a result of differential structural forces shaping those outcomes for students at the intersection of those different groups. Overall, there's some evidence for narrowing in disparities across the board, although structural work has to be done to enshrine these moves towards parity and to systematize them. Finally, we're going to take a glimpse of the future of the undergraduate student body, and that's our incoming freshmen and transfers for fall of 21. Because there is not yet a fall census, I'm showing you the students that have deposited for fall 21 right now. And then the other years you see on this graph, 2018, 19, and 18 are all data for this time and that year. So May 18th in 2020, 2019, and 2018, and what the deposit pools looked like at that time. So the blue line you see is signals the most significant increase in underrepresented student representation among any group that we looked at. Recalling the last slide on the student composition of new undergraduates at the beginning of my presentation, the slide showing some of the highest representation rates for BIPOC and underrepresented students. You will now see the newest incoming cohort of new undergraduate freshmen and the continuation of this trend. The next data series is the representation of BIPOC freshmen. Although we are not experiencing as big of an increase in representation of BIPOC students from year to year, so from last year, this year, it's still an incremental ascent in representation. The last two data series are for transfer, so traditionally underrepresented transfer and BIPOC student representation amongst transfers. Here, although we're at a plateau relative to last year with representation of traditionally underrepresented students, we're hitting another historic high of BIPOC student representation for transfers. So this marks the end of my presentation, but before I conclude, I want to pause to consider what these data can say about us and about who we are in the context of racial equity. The trends in student, staff, and faculty representation, as well as student outcomes, illustrate the growing representation of traditionally underrepresented and BIPOC members of our community. But those increases in representation aren't in themselves sufficient to eliminate barriers to equity. We as a campus must dedicate ourselves to the work that must be done to eliminate these barriers for marginalized and underserved groups. Thank you again for coming and for having me here today for this truly historic moment for Seattle University.
Thank you, Irina, for that excellent, excellent presentation. So as you will see on the next slide, all of the information that Irina was sharing with us is really important because research tells us that there is a correlation between positive experiences and perceptions and outcomes. And the educational outcomes for our students are really important. Obviously, we want to bring our students here and we want to make sure that they have a great experience, but we also want the outcomes for our students to be positive. Next slide, please. And so what we can remember is that really the road to persistence and belonging is really an intersection, as reflected on this next slide. It is an intersection of three important ingredients: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they all must be working together in order for our students to thrive and for our students to persist and to achieve their goals. Remember that diversity doesn't stick without inclusion, and inclusion cannot be attained without equity-mindedness. And so we recognize that we have different starting points, and that is precisely the information that Irina was sharing with you. We have different starting points. We have to understand the differentiation within our student body. And if we are focused on increasing and retaining our more diverse student body, it really is important for us to take stock and understand the data that will inform how we will go about making Seattle University an inclusively excellent community. And it's really important that we are data informed and not data driven, because people don't live the stories. And so, next slide, please. There is a quote by writer Chimamanda Adichie that I think really resonates when we think about the information that we've just heard and all that has transpired this year. This quote by Adichie that you see on the screen connected with this idea of having systems that are out of balance, right? Unbalanced, inequitable systems are held tighter by the stories that we tell ourselves, the narratives of racial difference that Brian Stevenson talks about a lot, and having a singularly defined story for individuals. Next slide, please. And the cycle is sustained. It's sustained by a cycle that is represented by the current slide that you're looking at. The stories, the stereotypes, they inform our thoughts and our unconscious habits and our actions. And these stories didn't just evolve with, for example, the killing of George Floyd or other Black men and women last summer. We all know that these stories have historical connections, as represented on the screen. So I really think it's important that we pay tribute to the lives lost last summer and the lives that continue to be lost. And I would ask you to take a deep breath wherever you are right now. Breathe because you can. Embrace your imperfection. Be gentle with yourself and with others. George Floyd was imperfect. He struggled with drug addiction, but he was also a father, a high school football star, and many other things. So we are going to pay tribute right now to the lives lost by saying their names.
Sometimes you just can't believe the things your eyes see. So much injustice in this life, and it's happening right on your TV screen. So you drop to your knees and you're praying, cause you can hear him saying he can't breathe. And it's all so overwhelming, because you know there's nothing you can do to help him. Continue to breathe, continue to breathe. In times like these, that's what your heart is for. Continue to breathe, continue to breathe. In honor of your brother, that's what your heart is for. There's always someone trying to take someone's power away. The history of the world is violent. Will it ever change? Now we're living in a time when you just can't that's what your heart is for. Continue to breathe, continue to breathe. In honor of your brother, that's what your heart is for. In times like these, nothing matters more. In honor of your brother, that's what your heart is for.
Wow, it was so powerful. Thank you to Natasha and to the ODI team for putting that video together, and to Irina for that data. I was really struck by the similar rates of hostility experienced by students of color in 2020 compared to 2015. There's so much for us to really chew on and think about. And I know I took a lot of notes. I hope you all did too. One thing that Natasha showed us was those 3 circles back in the beginning of the affirmation, allyship, and action. And did you notice that the action bubble was a little bit bigger? I say this because I think it's important for us to listen and to affirm the stories of BIPOC folks, but it's also important for us to take action. As Joelle Pretty so powerfully described earlier, she said the only way to interrupt the self-sustaining system of white supremacy is to work against it, to dismantle it. But it is true, we must think, right? We must feel, we must be open to hearing the stories of folks we wittingly or unwittingly other. So what we're going to do now is take a little time to do some reflecting. We'll do that throughout our time today. Natasha said, bring a journal. So if you're the kind of person who likes to write, get a journal, get a piece of paper. For now, let us think about the following questions, and they will appear on the next slide. How has my life story informed narratives I hold toward others? What do I know at a personal level about the experiences of BIPOC members of SU? What do I experience when I hear about these experiences? Do I want to hear them? Where do I recognize the systems inside of me? How specifically has systematic racism been embedded in my everyday work and practices at the institution? Let's take about 15 minutes. I think that's how much time we have to do some reflecting. And for the last few minutes of our time together, we will be blessed by the Spelman College Glee Club and their performance of A Bridge Over Troubled Water. Be back in 15. Hey folks, I was just informed that we're gonna have about 5 minutes for reflecting. We will play the video, the beautiful rendition of Bridge Over Troubled Water, and then we'll get right to the panel after that. So don't go far, stay by your computers, spend some time reflecting, and we will See you in just a few minutes. Thanks. We're going to move on ahead to our next session on allyship for solidarity. We'll begin with a panel discussion, which will be moderated by Rachel Luft, who is Associate Professor in Sociology. Professor Luft, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome. That music helped me get back in my body. I hope it did the same for you. It was really beautiful. Thank you to everyone joining this summit. I know we are all so Zoom weary, and we're here because we care so much about racial justice at SU. I want to, in particular, thank Natasha Martin for organizing the summit and for all of the heavy lifting you do all year to help us make Seattle University an anti-racist institution. I also want to give a shout out to all the panelists, Colette Taylor, Michelle Kim, Lakeisha Kimbrough, and Chris Van Loo. Natasha invited each of us. Most of us don't know each other. The idea was to have us come from different parts of the university, different personal locations, and we're excited to get to be in some kind of conversation together. So I was asked to frame the conversation, and then I'll offer a few remarks, and then we'll hear from the panelists who will introduce themselves a little bit more. My own comments come out of my personal experience as a white, queer, Ashkenazi Jewish woman. Also, my life as an activist scholar with one foot in intersectional social justice, social movements, and another foot in the academy in the study and teaching of race, gender, and social movements. So I want to offer 7 principles for anti-racist allyship. 7 principles where allyship is the commitment to acting in solidarity. And my new favorite definition of solidarity is one I learned just last month from Jasmine Mahmood, who's here at Seattle University with us for a brief while longer in performance studies. A definition that an understanding that she learned from Ricardo Gamboa, and that is solidarity is taking the risk together. So allyship is a commitment to solidarity, to taking the risk together. So the first principle I want to offer is that allyship happens in accountable relationship to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. For those of us who are white, whiteness is our default. The default of white people is whiteness, is white culture, white practice. And even with good intentions, we revert to what is known and what is comfortable and what will ultimately benefit us. White Jewish anti-racist organizer Martin Friedman, whom some of you know from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, defines accountability as the mechanisms that hold us to our commitments when otherwise it is optional. Accountability is the mechanisms that hold us to our commitments when otherwise it is optional. He asks, how would those of us who are white behave if it were our kids walking down the street, driving in their own cars, getting an education or a job at Seattle University? Accountability is the infrastructure that has us act as if it is our kids. Number 2, that said, being an ally does not mean distancing from other white people because we're so much better than all the other white people. When we're new on the path to allyship, we can be really moved to demonstrate how different we are from all the other annoying white people, from all the annoying white people. And the truth is we are the annoying white people, or at least we have much more in common with all our annoying brothers and sisters and siblings than we don't. And so rather than distancing from them, our job as white allies is to bring them along. Being an ally means calling in white people, even when it's really tempting to distance ourselves from them. Number 3, if acting in solidarity is taking the risk together, then those of us who are white can often be tempted to focus on the together part of that phrase, when the most important word, in my opinion, is risk. Allyship is acting in solidarity when solidarity is taking the risk together. Allyship is cultivating a relationship to risk, is deepening our capacity for risk. We know in our heads that Black, Indigenous, and people of color live in a heightened state of risk for being people of color, even more so when they speak up and act up against racism. And being white and being an ally means learning to risk, learning to deepen our capacity for risk. We tend not to be very good at it. We get really embarrassed and awkward and terrified. We get terrified that we're embarrassed and awkward that we're terrified. And we don't have much practice. It's why Robin DiAngelo, Seattle University alum, I think, named her book White Fragility. Risking can be hard for us. It can also mean real threats to our economic security or safety. And it's what being an ally is. In my personal struggle with that, it helps me when I remember how much of what works in my life is because of unearned privilege, how much of what works in my life is more than my fair share, is on the backs of other people. And it helps me channel those resources, money, safety, credibility, toward undoing white supremacy. So the third principle of anti-racist allyship is that it requires risk, and risk is the reinvestment of our privilege. And I just want to say, not in the spirit of false modesty, but just to be real, this is hard. This is really hard for me. I feel like I have a long way to go to really actually begin to risk, to really reinvest my privilege. I'm uncomfortable plenty, but that's different than risk. The fourth principle of anti-racist allyship is going beyond this analysis of privilege. It's good to start with an analysis of privilege, but to go beyond the analysis of privilege toward understanding the costs of white supremacy for all people, understanding the costs of white supremacy for white people. First, I mean the spiritual costs, the integrity costs, the hypocrisy costs, the humanity costs of not living into our values for those of us who have a value of justice. I also mean the material costs of what white supremacy does for all of us. This is, of course, not to create a false equivalency. It's not all the same kind of hard. Ruthie Gilmore, race scholar Ruthie Gilmore, talks about all of the dimensions, all the arrangements of white supremacy as amounting to the likelihood of premature death for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And what a lot of us who are white don't recognize is how much of what is hard about life in the United States, for most white people too, at least, is caused by white supremacy. The social safety net with huge gaping holes in it, an inhuman carceral system, a non-democratic electoral system, right? These are all rooted in white supremacy. So here I'm inspired by Black political theorist Heather McGhee's recent book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. She talks about white people being caught in a net, not trapped, in a trap not set for us, white people being caught in a trap not set for us. She tells a story of a large swimming pool being built in Montgomery, Alabama by the New Deal that was segregated. And when desegregation happened in the 1960s, Montgomery shut that pool down rather than integrate it, right? Shut the pool down for everyone. Today, we can look at the white politicians across the South who are limiting all people's right to vote in their desperate desire to exclude Black, Indigenous, and people of color from the franchise. And that seems to be okay with some of the very white people who will find it harder to vote themselves. Spike Lee years ago called this the bamboozlement of white Americans, how confused we are about this. And so I just wanted to suggest that the fourth principle of allyship is that dismantling white supremacy isn't fighting for the other, it's fighting for all of us, recognizing who is most directly impacted. Understanding of this principle is what saves us from acting like white saviors when our own house is on fire too, and we don't even realize it. Allyship is the opportunity to stop being bamboozled. Sikh civil rights lawyer Valerie Kaur says, shallow solidarity is based on the logic of exchange, but deep solidarity is rooted in recognition. I show up for you because I see you as part of me. Your liberation is bound up in my own. And this spirit, I think, is the inspiration behind Bell Hook's invitation, visionary invitation to collective liberation. Bell Hooks calls this collective liberation. And I think it's why some organizers of color call deep solidarity not allyship, but co-conspiratorship or being an accomplice. I'm going to shift to this language because it resonates for me, but we don't have to get up on it and use everyone allyship if that's what works for you. The fourth principle in sum is that being a co-conspirator against white supremacy is a framework of collective liberation for all of us. The fifth principle is that co-conspiratorship is not a concept or even a politic, or not only a concept or only a politic. It's a practice. And here I'm taking my inspiration from the generations of brilliant Black feminists and other visionaries who have helped us understand that freedom is a practice. I'm thinking of Toni Cade Bambara, thinking of Alexis Pauline Gumbs, I'm thinking of Adrienne Marie Brown, I'm thinking of Anishinaabe Leanne Bitasa Masake Simpson. Freedom is a practice, and it has me thinking that allyship, or experiencing allyship as a call to practice. This is a big relief because it means we don't have to have it figured out first. We just have to practice it every day. And that also means we have to practice it every day. There were years in my life where I was really into meditation. I didn't actually ever meditate, but I was really into it. That's not how it works, I think, for allyship either. Sixth, despite the fact that allyship is a practice, that being an accomplice is a practice, there is no formula. And not only that, from my experience, it means living in a lot of tension all the time, the tensions that can feel like contradictions, especially for those of us raised in white supremacy culture. This means, for example, following the leadership of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, being accountable to Black, Indigenous, and people of color movements in particular to the in particular, and also not waiting to be asked to do the right thing. It means speaking up way more than we are, and also way less. It means finding humility and courage, and usually needing both in the same moment. It means knowing we must act and rarely feeling like we have any idea what to do. It means taking risks and being uncomfortable and making sacrifices and not getting thanked or expecting to get thanked. In my life, this has been really hard. I think it perhaps is especially hard for all my sister white perfectionists out there who really like to do things our way and on our schedule with a lot of prep time. This too is a culture of white supremacy, perhaps laced with a little sexism. What gets me through the loss of face over and over is remembering that dismantling white supremacy culture is a contribution toward dismantling white supremacy structure. So the sixth principle is that co-conspiratorship feels like paradox, living in a soup of tension. And finally, the seventh principle, following Black historian Robin D.G. Kelley, is that being a co-conspirator for racial justice is to cultivate a sense of what we're longing for, not just what we're fighting against. He calls this living into freedom dreams. First Nation scholar Taya Yake Alfred calls ongoing colonization a failure of European imagination, a failure of European imagination. And so I want to end by hoping that our practice of co-conspiratorship together means that we get better at dreaming together for collective liberation and living into that as a daily, messy practice. So with that, I will close my opening and turn it over to my illustrious panel. I can't wait to learn from all of you. Folks on the panel know the order. We're going to start with Colette Taylor, and please tell us a little bit about you and your how you're in community with us at Seattle University, and we'll open it up to everyone.
Rachel, thank you very much for that context, and you've got me thinking. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Colette Taylor, the chair of the Leadership and Professional Studies Department in the College of Education, as well as the program director for the Doctorate of Educational Learning and Leadership. So I primarily teach at CLU in the doctoral program, students looking at being leaders in not only in education, but in other types of organizations. I am also the founding director of the College of Education's Center for Social Transformation and Leadership. So I come to you as a BIPOC woman, mother of two, multiracial as they identify themselves, young men who others see as Black men who have been experiencing a lot of trauma over the last few years. And it's given me the opportunity to not only engage with them into how they see allyship, both of which have had the privilege of attending institution, one of which who just graduated from CLU in December, another who's at the University of Washington in a PhD program, but have experienced their own conversations with their faculty and friends and colleagues about what it means to be an ally to them and what it means to be an ally to members of the community that others may look and see as ourselves, like ourselves. Also in conversations with my own doctoral students, really talking about equity, inclusion, diversity, and what we need to do in a leadership concept to not only be allies for ourselves, but leaders of our organizations. So I come to you today with some thoughts about that, but I want to share with you the one thing my youngest son said to me last night. I was talking about what I was going to talk about allyship, and he said, "Mama, would you like you to share with everyone that allyship is not a badge? It is not like you can go and prove that you're an ally. It's not something that you get thanks for. It is not an identity. Allyship is something that you actively do to engage and support your community members without," and this was his words, "without asking me how to be an ally." That's his words. So I talked about that and reflect with him about that, and I reflect on it over the weekend and whatnot. And one of the things that it came to is thinking about allyship is really about intentionality of breaking systemic racism in a variety of different ways wherever you can be. It takes courage, it takes audacity to stand up to systems and others that might differ from you. But actually, it just ultimately takes responsibility for yourselves and your community, and responsibility for others. And how do we do that? And we have to actively acknowledge who we are and all of our intersectionalities. You know, I am not just an African-American woman. I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, all these things play into how I come into the world every day. They come into the world every day when I step on campus, when we're able to step on campus, when I step into the classroom, when I step into the grocery store. All of the things that I do actively impact how I am as an ally and how allies impact and interact with me. We have to take the opportunity to listen to our stories, our narratives, because my narrative is not Lakeisha's narrative. It is not Natasha's narrative. It's not Chris's narrative. But we're all in this together to create allyship together. So we have to listen to each other, our experiences, and come collectively to think about how do we create a better community. I share with my students that we have to work together with authenticity and integrity and not be about, as my son said, the badge. You know, how are we really truly making the world better, and how can we collectively do that together? And that requires direct, difficult conversations. I'm in the classroom, I work with faculty, and sometimes conversations about allyship, equity, and diversity are really hard. And often I see my colleagues who are telling me that they're allies, wanting to talk about what to do rather than who they are in the process, and how who they are impacts what we do. And that's a hard conversation to have. And I think even myself as a BIPOC woman, I have my own stereotypes. I have my own privilege. I intersect with the world for my own experiences. And I have to own that. You know, sometimes I too am impacted by how I was raised, the experiences that I've had, Sometimes I'm not always the best ally. And that's okay as long as we're learning together as we develop a community. So we think about allyship, not just about creating an anti-racist community, if you will, but allyship together to create community with all of our intersectionalities in that. One of the things that I would also like to think about is, in order to do that effectively, we need to not be afraid to educate ourselves. And we also need to be afraid to say, I don't know. Often I have students that ask me, Dr. Taylor, well, you've been doing this for 30 plus years and you're my chair and you talk about diversity and equity and inclusion. And so just tell me how to fix it. I don't know how to fix it. I know what we can do to improve it. I know how we can work together to make it better, but there's no easy solution. And it's okay for us to say there's no easy solution. And I think that's what makes us better allies, because that allows us to educate ourselves, to work together, to build our capacity, because we're building capacity to create a better community. And I think finally, I just want us to think about, or would like to share with you, that I think we need to recognize that as Seattle University, as Natasha did a lovely presentation of our context, we are not a perfect institution, but we're also not here to be perfect. We're here to educate, not just our students, but educate ourselves into creating the community. And as we do that, we need to understand, as we develop ourselves as allies, not only as individuals within our organization, but developing Seattle U as an ally to our communities. Because a lot of the work that we need to do is also about supporting our communities, Black and Brown, in Seattle and Washington. How are we going beyond just campus to be allies? And that requires us to do some deep thinking about it as an institutional standpoint. How do we become allies to our communities as an institution, not just within ourselves? So those are just some of my thoughts in the conversation about allyship. And I will turn it over to, I believe it was Keisha?
It's Michelle Kim, thank you so much.
Michelle, sorry, I missed that, sorry, it's Michelle.
Thanks for all of that. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi everybody. 안녕하세요. 제 이름은 김민조이고 이 자리에 같이 참석할 수 있게 해주셔서 감사합니다. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Michelle Kim. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the director in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. And I've actually never done that before, introduced myself or spoken aloud in Korean in my professional context. But for some reason, as I was prepping for my reflections, I felt it necessary for me to create space for my native language this morning, given the month that we're in and given what today is about. And, you know, listening to Rachel, your framing, and listening to, there's a lot that I want to say that's already been said. So I think there's some themes already coming up. So I wanted to start by sharing the two words that I kept circling back to when thinking about the questions that Dr. Martin provided. You know, what is solidarity, or when does it feel performative versus authentic? And those words were relationship and empathy. And for some reason, I felt really apprehensive about naming those terms as what I find to be foundational to this work, for fear that to some it might sound really fluffy. But I remain convicted that the work of justice and equity and anti-racism is really about trying to be in right relationship with each other, with communities, with systems, with institutions and countries, et cetera. And that empathy is really hard. It's a skill that requires immense practice and vulnerability and courage to pursue. And so in order to be a little bit more succinct, because I had so many thoughts floating in my reflection, I wanted to just share some kind of bullet points that kind of summarize, I think, what I've been thinking about when it comes to relationship and empathy in relationship to solidarity. One is that when I feel most in solidarity with people, that people are in solidarity with me in my pain, in my joys, in my losses or my wins. It's when people have taken the time to learn my story and then imagine from my vantage point what X situation might feel like. And that solidarity, right, doesn't actually require you to know a person of a particular identity personally or intimately, but it does require you to see the humanity in each person or people's. Because I think people get caught up like, oh, but I've never had an X friend, or I've never really been in community with X people. But that, can you see the humanity, right, in who they are and their experiences? The next point that I wanted to share is empathy requires humility and curiosity. And Colette actually spoke to this a little bit, that it's the ability to say, I don't know, and I have never experienced. But then being moved to ask yourself, right, like, why? Or I wonder what that feels like. And that it requires you to practice believing the narrative of that person. And that believing that person might require you to realize that my lived experience and my perspective and my truth is, one, not the only truth, but that it might also not be correct, right? And that's humbling. How do you come to terms with that? And that, the question about performative allyship. Allyship to me feels performative when it lacks depth of compassion, when it's disconnected from those who are impacted and is void of change. Because change of heart should be reflected in changes in your action and your behaviors, right? And I really like the wording that Dr. Martin offered in one of her questions to us, which was, what skills are necessary to pursue solidarity, pursuit? That solidarity is an active pursuit. I often say to students, sometimes because I want to be relatable and funny, but really also to get a point across that being woke is not a destination, right? That the moment you claim to be woke, and again, your son spoke to this, right? The moment that you claim wokeness or being an ally is kind of the moment that you failed and missed the point. Because there's always more to learn and unlearn and more to do and undo. And I feel like you get swept up in this culture of shaming, right? Somehow I have arrived and you have not, right? And I think, Rachel, you also spoke to this, that there's the annoying white people, and I am not that annoying white person. So you start to get caught up. And I honestly hadn't planned to say this, but I just kind of felt it rising in my heart. And so, how this pursuit, I think, shows up for me personally is reminding myself that my now kind of proximity to Blackness as a wife of a Black man and as a mother of a biracial child does not mean that I have arrived in my understanding of the Black experience, or that somehow it eliminates the anti-Blackness and the colorism that is woven into the Asian and Asian American experience. So it actually then urges me and moves me, sometimes not because I want to, but because it comes up, right, in my most intimate relationships, to confront it head on, to see it and to talk about it, to feel it, to unravel it. And it humbles me. It breaks me, really, to listen to the stories of my family and to believe it and to quiet my ego and then to move and shift. And so I think pursuing solidarity, both in our individual lives and in our collective spaces, requires us to consistently have a posture of listening and asking and believing and sharing and then changing. And so I think I'll just end my reflections with a particular question, which is what behaviors or habits or attitudes have changed in your life, for those of us who have professed commitment, right, to justice and equity and anti-racism, like what has changed for you? So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Lakeisha Kimbrough, welcome aboard.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. I'm so deeply moved by what's already been shared and so honored and humbled. My name is Lakeisha Kimbrough, and I have the privilege and honor of working with the Seattle University Youth Initiative as the Washington Middle School site manager via the Center for Community Engagement. And I'm so grateful to be in learning and growing space with you all in this way today. And I would be remiss not to call into space and give my honor to ancestors, to Creator, who have allowed and gifted this honor and space today. I am truly grateful to be able to share some of my thoughts and beliefs on what solidarity is and means to me. And I hope that something I share to your open heart today resonates and moves through your body in a way that says, to you, or that says, oh, I wonder more about that. I'm a little curious about this or that. And so thank you for just listening with me and experiencing and being with me. Y'all, I really believe that solidarity is a gift, and that the gift of solidarity allows us an opportunity and space to connect to and with ourselves and to and with others in nature in amazingly powerful ways that help us and allow us to create and make meaning on some very deep and personal, individual, shared, and collective levels and ways. And so I'm so grateful for the opportunity to dive into solidarity. Solidarity, in my mind, is a thing. It's living. It's something that lives and breathes every day, all day. And it's an action. It calls us in. It asks us to be with it, to be with self, to be with one another in really intimate, powerful ways. Solidarity asks us and allows us to connect in such a way that through these connection points, connecting authentically to self, to others, to nature on a daily, ongoing fashion, in an ongoing way. And when we do this intimate connecting, we are engaging in active acts of resistance against systems of oppression. This is one of the gifts of solidarity, which calls us to be us and no more them, right? We are all us. And that's, for me, one of the beautiful gifts of solidarity. I believe that in living, in loving, in acting, and in walking in solidarity, we also are living in, walking in, and holding our shared and our collective humanity, which means that we are living in, walking in, loving in our shared and collective liberation. And then solidarity asks us to hold that collective humanity and that collective liberation are inextricably tied, inextricably linked. There is no pulling them apart. There is no liberation without solidarity. And we all are called to do this work, right? Y'all, I truly 100 wholeheartedly believe that living in, walking in, loving in, acting in solidarity gives us the opportunity and the gift of bearing witness. Bearing witness is affirming. It says, I see you. You matter. I have the honor of holding sacred story and narrative. Living in, walking in, loving in, acting in solidarity gives us the opportunity to mess up together, to grow together, to learn together. I don't have much more to share about solidarity and what this gift means to me, but I do want to end my short sharing with you with asking that we heed and that you consider the invitation to heed the call daily, to live in, to act in, to love in, to lean into, and to learn in solidarity. Thank you so much for the honor of sharing space with you today.
Thank you, Lakeisha. And Chris, we turn it over to you for the last few minutes.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Chris Van Loo, the Vice President for Information Technology and Chief Information Officer for Seattle University. I'm thrilled to be a part of Seattle University, and among the many benefits of my time here has been the engagement with so many thoughtful colleagues who have contributed to my growth as a professional and as a person. And relevant to today, part of this growth has included the understanding that throughout my life, I have benefited from, and in many ways, I have been complicit with the white privilege and institutional racism that permeates our society at every level. I am not a scholar. I am probably one of those annoying white people that Rachel mentioned earlier, in fact, and right now I'm thinking, OMG, why did Dr. Martin put me on this panel? Today, I really joined this panel from a place of awakening and aspiration, much more than achievement. I am not yet living a life of full allyship and solidarity. And so what I have to offer this morning seems awfully meager in the context of the daily challenges faced by people of color. In all transparency, I'm still trying to learn what solidarity really means so that I can inhabit it. But some of what I have learned, at least I believe I've learned, solidarity acknowledges one's complicity with institutional racism and commits to change. Solidarity honors others for their inherent humanity. Such honor is not a gift, it is nothing less than their due as fellow human beings. Solidarity is not expecting my colleagues of color to educate me on solidarity and allyship. I must do my own work, but solidarity also gratefully accepts any counsel or correction that they do choose to offer me. Solidarity is to relinquish power, as Dr. Benjamin Danielson stated in his powerful February 18th presentation of Racial Equity Reckoning, quote, "Power grows when it is shared," unquote. Solidarity is teaching my children that they were born into white privilege and that their privilege is supported through systemic institutional oppression and racism, and that to live as anything less than anti-racists is to defend the current unjust system. Here at Seattle University, solidarity includes practical actions in the workplace, ensuring our staff co-develop our inclusive excellence approach, embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout every stage of the employee journey, affirming that DEI progress makes a team more effective in addition to more humane and just, enabling team members to participate in the events and service opportunities at Seattle University, and including during the normal workday, because inclusive excellence and DEI work is a vital part of their job. And for now, I'll just mention, one more. Solidarity is sacrificing white privilege for real equality. And I'll admit, I'm still working out what to do with this truth. In wrapping up my comments, and to illustrate what I mean, I'd like to read to you an excerpt from an opinion piece by Kelsey Smoot from the US edition of The Guardian that absolutely confronted me on this topic last year and that I've been grappling with ever since. Quote, "Genuine allyship is not kindness. It is not a charitable act, nor is it even a personal commitment to hold anti-racist ideals. It is a fall from grace. Real allyship, enacted by white Americans with a clear objective to make equitable the lived experiences of individuals across racial lines, means a willingness to lose things, I mean palpable, incalculable loss. The loss of the charmed life associated with being a white person in America, refusing a pay raise at one's job and insisting that it be reallocated to coworkers of color who are undoubtedly being underpaid. The loss of potentially every close relationship with other white friends and family members who refuse to acknowledge or amend their behaviors that reinforce systemic oppression. The loss of bodily safety by way of physically intervening when violence is being inflicted onto Black bodies. If the white people in my life could hit a button and instantly remove the privileges afforded to them along racial lines, would they hit that button? Would they truly want to wake up tomorrow in an America in which my life mattered just as much as theirs, if it came at the cost of all they have come to know and enjoy in the vein of white privilege, unquote. And I am confronted by that. Would I hit that button? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm wanting to be in conversation with all of you and wishing that we had a lot more time. And I keep remembering as each of you closes and I want to ask a question, that the idea is that we get to be in conversation for the rest of our lives together about this, that this is really the beginning it's not the beginning, actually. People have been working a long time. It's the middle of a conversation. And I look forward to more opportunities, all of us on this panel and all of us in this community continuing to explore and open and fail and be in relationship together. I'd like to close by offering a few words of someone I've learned a lot from. This is a reading from Mickey Scott Bay Jones. She's a Black feminist spiritual leader, and it's called An Invitation to Brave Space. Together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. Thanks, everyone.
Wow, that was so incredibly powerful. I'm, just still processing a lot of what was shared. We just really thank the panelists. How about this? I know they can't see you out there in the virtual world, but why don't you just send them some virtual love and affirmation from one spirit to the next? Wow, they are courageous, right? What are the words that I can think of? We appreciate you for your truth telling, for your strength and courage, and for your willingness to risk relationship and reputation for justice. And thank you for reminding us too that this is an ongoing process, that we haven't arrived. If we believe this in our hearts, in fact, then maybe we've missed the mark, right? Love in action. Love in committed, risk-taking action is the only way to allyship and solidarity. So let's be brave together. Well, friends, for the next 15 minutes, why don't we take some time to do some more self-reflecting on what we've heard about ourselves through our colleagues' sharing. Does that make sense? Let's acknowledge first that this can be hard, but it's an important step for all of us to engage the work of anti-racism and racial justice. We have some reflection questions, and they're going to appear on the slide here soon. And so let's try to engage these with real intentionality. Let's listen and respond with open hearts. Here are the questions. Actually, it's really one question. What reasons have I used for not taking a stronger stand against racism, or for backing away from supporting people of color? Might the following ring true for some of us? I would be a committed and effective ally if only people of color weren't so angry, impatient, or demanding. If only people of color realized I am different from other white people. I treat everyone the same. If only people of color didn't expect the government to do everything for them, it wouldn't ask for special treatment. During our reflection time, we will hear from our own Seattle University choir and their heartfelt rendition of You Will Be Found. This will be followed by Provost Shane Martin's introduction of our keynote speaker, the prophetic and illustrious Michelle Alexander. You do not want to miss this. So let's spend some time reflecting on these questions. We'll hear from the choir, and we'll be back to hear Shane Martin's introduction of Michelle Alexander at 12:20. All right, y'all. See you soon.